Welcome to the Spirituality What? Podcast, where we explore the mysteries, joys, and challenges of being spiritual beings navigating our unpredictable human experience we call life here on planet Earth. I'm your friendly guide, Rebecca, ready to jump into our adventure of the day. Hello, Spirituality What listeners. It is a week away from Christmas. I'm finding that hard to believe for some reason. So if your emotions weren't high last week, maybe they are this week. Maybe people are already starting to arrive for your holiday festivities. Or maybe you celebrate a different holiday and it's in full swing here at the end of the year. So we are going to get back into our riveting discussion with Maryann on emotions as spiritual beings. And in the part 2 of this 2-part episode today, we are going to talk a little bit more about the belief code and Psyche. And again, we're going to go back to this child need of attachment, which has been a theme for the podcast. Quite a few episodes we have talked about that, originating from Gabor Mate's work in The Myth of Normal and with the podcast on mental health with Deb earlier this year. We're going to talk about the accessibility of the emotion and the body code. This is something you can do for yourself, which I love. Intuition as a form of spirituality, specifically for Maryann, and how we kind of lose our intuition. The absolute efficiency of the emotion code, which is part of why I love it so much. Imaginary friends, which is kind of a fun part of our topic. Emotions and our spiritual bodies and beings. Emotions as a key part of the human experience here in these 3D bodies in this 3D planet. And then actually Maryann is the first one to ask me a question. So if you stay tuned till the end of the episode, I do have my first question as part of this podcast being kind of interviewed a little bit, which is kind of exciting. A little change of the roles there, turning of the tables. With that, we are going to get to it, and be sure to listen to the outro for an opportunity to win some free merch. Let's do it.
So imagine, I've worked with veterans. So imagine that, like they're witnessing horrific things. It's a shock to their system, but they have to go and be a soldier. They have to still function and do things. So the body takes the hit. And then when they're out of the stress response, maybe years later, they can actually, something's off here. Or they feel numb most of the time.
Yeah, like how else would your body handle trauma like that except to stop feeling? That's a really interesting response.
Right. Because stress response is fight, flight, and numb.
Yeah. Really interesting. So what is the belief code then?
So the belief code, when I got certified in that, I was like, whoa, this is like just amazing. So before all that, I was trained in Psyche, which is the kinesthetic approach to the psyche, to understand this. And it's all based in that we live with core beliefs, and it makes up our world. So we're learning all this before we're 7. So the theory is that from 0 to 7, we are just hypnotically taking in information.
That makes sense.
We don't discern. We're just sort of like, that's right, that's black, my, mommy loves me, doesn't love me, But children begin to take responsibility. They don't have the ability to say, my dad is mean. No, it's I must be bad.
Yes.
So that begins to create a core belief that I'm not good enough. If a parent yells, you spilled the milk, and that's consistently over time, that kind of approach, that child then identifies it, I must be a bad child because I spill milk. And it then translates into this. So here's a core belief. I'm not good enough, or I'm always bad. And that builds other core beliefs. And so in the belief code, we're tapping into what are some core beliefs. And I have a wonderful, app with the manual in it and all that kind of stuff that, you muscle test according to the person and what comes up. And I will get stuff and I will be like, I don't think this is going to make any sense to them. And then they're going, oh my God, that, like it hits them right between the eyes. So we have to trust that this is the amazing system of the body knows exactly what we're doing. And it's helping and supporting us. And that's the subconscious mind.
Yeah. So emotion code, body code, and belief code all utilize muscle testing then?
Yes.
Yes. So I love muscle testing. I mentioned this before on the podcast. I think it should be like something they teach children in school. I love it so much.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. We talked a little bit about the core beliefs in the episode with Deb Mahan, and that information was also in The Myth of Normal by Gabor Mate, which is a super interesting book. And I like that. So I'm happy to mention that book multiple times because it's like, I've read it a couple times now. It's so good and so dense. I feel like I can only take a couple things out of it every time I listen to it because it's kind of heavy. So we talked about trapped emotions or stuck emotions. So the emotion code helps us release those. The body code helps us release or understand. Is it releasing or just more understanding where it is in the body, or both?
We release
also
it. And also you might find more ways to release aches and pains. I know that sounds kind of odd, but the body's always talking to us. It's trying to inform us that something's off. So we might get a pain in our shoulder and we go, geez, I must have slept on it wrong. Or I must have, pulled a muscle, whatever. We don't think that something about the arm is informing us that we're upset about something. So if we don't pay attention to it, what happens? We get maybe a shoulder pain, a shoulder issue, and we have to get, shoulder surgery and all that. And so it's kind of like if there's a message pathway and we don't listen, the pathway gets worn down on a physical level. So the body code helps us to kind of pinpoint, what that pain is for. So we use terms like, what's the underlying issue around this elbow pain? And stuff will come up. Fascinates me.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And I think what's really interesting about this conversation as it relates to this podcast specifically is we're not talking about anything really even spiritual. We're just talking about the fact that people using these methodologies are basically submitting to their subconscious rather than using their conscious brain to drive root cause analysis of pains or issues or whatever. It's really just the submission or I'm gonna use that word for right now. I feel like there might be another one I want to use, but I'm gonna stick with that one, to listening to what's going on in your own body. This isn't woo-woo. This isn't anything. It's like literally right there. It's crazy.
Yeah. The body code and emotion code, belief code use the chakra system and the acupuncture system.
The meridians, yeah.
To help direct us. And acupuncture has been around. We know that there is energy moving in the body. So it's pretty profound to try to access it in a different way. That's what all these new therapies are trying to do, is say, hey, there's another way. And the body has the ability to teach us. We just haven't been listening.
Yeah, that's a key point right there. We have not been listening. We have not been paying attention. We've been actively ignoring it, maybe in some cases. So I want to talk a little bit more. Like I said before, I love the emotion code. It comes in a book, so it's super accessible.
Yes.
There's a book you can buy. I actually bought it for all my girlfriends for Christmas one year. And this is something, it's super easy to learn. You can learn it on your own. Body Code has a book too. Maryann's showing it on the screen right now. So that's not the only way though. There are people like Maryann who know these tools and who can perform very similarly to what you might do for yourself, but sometimes in a much more efficient fashion, in my experience. You can perform these things both in an in-person setting and a virtual setting.
Absolutely. And I have to say, like, when you're just saying, you could read the book, but sometimes you need someone else to kind of help read your symptoms with you.
Yeah.
In the spirituality, let me say something about that, the connection. We're using our intuition, which I think of
Mm.
as could be a
Yeah,
form of spirituality. We're
sure.
using a form of energy connection. You and I are talking, we're across the country. How can we feel connected? Well, yeah, we see each other, but there's neurotransmitters that in my brain and your brain that are connecting.
Mm.
And that's what's happening even in any virtual situation. Why is it that you can think of someone deeply who you care about and they call you? That's our scientific neurotransmitters that are pinging out and saying, "Who I miss you. I want to see you." So if we understand that, then we can understand that there's intuition being activated in our systems when we ask for it.
When we
And
pay
that's all I
attention
do.
and listen. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And I ask for it. I ask for our intuitions to guide us. And when we can be bigger in that concept without it having to go, what is that? I just trust it.
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely. I think that for me, I I work in process improvement on my day when I'm not doing the podcast, right? So my day job, and I love efficiency. So for me, the emotion code is so fucking efficient because you don't have to sit there and talk for 5 hours about something. You could just be like, boom, 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 and it's done. Let's move on to the next one, right? So
I
I
love
love
it.
that part.
That's exactly why I pursued this other way of doing psychotherapy, because I was like, how I don't want to sit in a psychotherapy session for years and years on end. How debilitating that could be. I want people to get it. And the system, I call it the body system, the subconscious system, the intuitive system, is so brilliant beyond our conscious mind. Like, let it guide us.
Mm,
Because the conscious mind, and this is something that I've heard in multiple places, the Psyche, material, and emotional, our conscious mind is so finite, it's running about 5% of our system.
yeah.
And 95% is the subconscious. So, the old adage of the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah.
And beneath the iceberg is this giant. Well, the subconscious mind is that giant iceberg underneath. It's just so unknown. It is infinite with wisdom.
It knows everything, literally.
Absolutely. And it's connected in ways to other energies, intelligence between us that can access amazing things. And it's like we have to receive that. But it doesn't have the same kind of thought language that we use in our conscious
Right.
mind.
That's true.
More metaphorical. People
Mm.
dream from their subconscious mind in these metaphors. So that's what we have to open our minds to, is that the metaphors we're experiencing are symbols to us. And it
Hmm.
could be symbols that we don't recognize yet.
So we talked a little bit about getting away from the ability to process emotions, but how do we get away from, as kids, I'm assuming, intuition? Is it a distrust where we incorrectly maybe interpret intuition and then we blame it on, well, that's what I thought, and so now I'm not going to trust that feeling, that gut feeling, or whatever you kind of want to say, or like how do we stop listening to our intuition
I think we do it as a society.
in
I
general?
think we do it as, I'm not blaming parents. I was probably part of that whole system too. When a child says or does something that feels a little off out of your scope, people get scared, so they compress it. Or they're at
Mm-hmm.
school and other kids make fun of them. If you have a child who has an imaginary friend and you say, there's really nobody there, you know,
It's like I
Um,
have some strong feelings on imaginary friends.
right. Okay. So they go to school and they mention it and everybody makes fun of them. That's the oppression. So we start learning that either we don't share it or it's not real to us. So we start closing the door to our intuitive selves. And I think probably if I could tell you in a nutshell what I do is I help people open that door again.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
And whatever that comes to them, but the more intuitive you are and the more you trust that your intuition, your alert system is better, your coping system is better, you're processing better because you have this wise self that's going, hey, I've been here all along, and
Hmm.
want to talk with you.
Yeah, and you're able to kind of access that. Yeah, so really quickly back on the imaginary friends. My strong opinion is that there is no such thing as imaginary friends because those kids are actually seeing some shit, even if we can't see it.
Okay, exactly. They are in tune with the energy. We don't know what it is, but I
Whatever.
agree with you. So
Yeah,
imaginary is a misnomer in
absolutely.
Israel.
It's just like just because you can't see it doesn't mean it ain't real. I mean, we have all
Right,
been there, right? What is that thing where like if a plane is crashing or landing onto a street or something, people will literally say I didn't see it because their conscious brain is so like that doesn't match what is supposed to be
right,
happening. Let
right,
people literally will not see things that are right in front of their face. So how can we even use that word
right.
imaginary?
Because we only develop the structure of things that's a tree, that's a lamp, this and that, until we have a word for it. And
That's true.
what children, and you see it in babies, they're looking around and they're giggling at something.
Yeah.
I can tell you a story about my nephew when he was 2. He was seeing elephants in the ceiling and he was giggling and he talked about it and his mom was like, oh, that's beautiful, like she encouraged that. But it's not just a parent that can encourage it, the social, if you go.
If they're at school for 8 hours a day or whatever, I
Yep.
mean, it kind of can
you
trump.
know could be a teacher that just says, okay, that's your, and God forbid they say it's real, then it's hallucination and
Yeah.
it's bad,
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
as opposed to tell us more about that, tell us
Yeah.
more about what you're seeing and what do they want you to know. And because if we have any fear about that, we're going to shut it down.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so really quickly, we've talked about a lot of stuff, and I want to talk a little bit. I want to get more into the spirituality part here. So, emotions are something that we experience as 3D human beings. I don't what do you think our spiritual selves, like let's say, there's a separation there. Do we experience emotions? What do you think about emotions and our spiritual parts of our bodies?
It's a great question. I've read a lot about people who've had near death experiences. So they go to the, so to speak, other side, and it's all love. That's how they describe it. I got a great book on Anita Majori. Okay, so she had near death experience, and she's amazing. She has a podcast now, and she does all kinds of stuff. But she going to the other side, you experience pure love. So it's not multiple feelings or emotions. It's one. It's just you with love.
Mm,
And then coming back, we have all the other array of emotions because now we're in our human body again. And so if we are understanding that the emotion is what is the spirituality of it, it's kind of in my mind like we have one foot in the spirit world, whatever we want to call that. And for if it's your religion, if it's in your understanding of God, if it's an understanding of energy, of animals and plants, but it's separate from this human body. And then we have this human body experience. And we have to live in both worlds, so to speak. And spirituality is it's so broad, I can't put a construct to it because I want people to experience what they experience
Yeah.
and just explore that,
Yeah.
whatever that is.
Yeah. I think it's in what you're saying, the interesting thought is one of the reasons we have this experience is to have emotions. They are part, like, the distinguishing factor there. If we take, I mean, I believe in near death experiences. I believe in all of that. I don't know, whatever, to each their own. If you don't, like, let's just take this as an example. Hypothetically, there's
Mm-hmm.
only one emotion in the spiritual world, and it's love. So we don't
Right.
get we don't we don't get the challenges that come with all these other emotions. We don't get the experiences that come with crying because you're sad versus crying because you're happy, and all of those, all the things that we learn and how we grow from that. And so that is very much a human experience.
Exactly. And you and I can have this conversation in 2 years from now, and it can be totally different
Totally.
because of our evolution of whatever it is that we're both living and experiencing. So it's not static to me at all.
Yeah.
And for someone who was this little kid in a Catholic school, a Catholic church, I did 12 years in a Catholic school.
Ooh.
I had a lot of inundation to that. Um, and then get to be in this broader state. It's like, let's do it. Let's just keep growing and evolving and understanding things.
Yeah. So I think the connection for me, emotions and spirituality, is it feels spiritual, but when I talk about it in the context of this conversation, it sounds very just like what we have been talking about, which is the emotion code, more specifically, mostly because I don't have experience with body code and belief code, but the emotion code has allowed me to connect more to my own self. And so for me, the definition of spirituality, my definition of spirituality is genuine connection. And so more authentic connection to my own self, to me, is a spiritual experience. And so being able to learn more about emotions, have tools to be able to process emotions in a super efficient and effective way, to me, it becomes a spiritual experience because of that, because of my specific definition of spirituality in general.
Well, let me ask you a question.
Sure.
What is it that you really felt changed? And this might be a bigger conversation by doing the emotion code versus just some talk therapy. What did
Yeah.
you notice?
So I've been in therapy my whole life, effectively. I'm a huge believer. I totally think that everyone can get something from therapy. As you mentioned, there's EMDR, there's all these different kinds of therapy. I'm like, if you've never tried a therapist, you should do it. And you shouldn't try just one, you should probably try 10. And you might find one you don't like, and that's okay. Just keep going, right? So I'm a big believer in therapy, but I got, I don't know, I got to a point where I just felt like I'm not making enough progress and it's too slow. And I love to talk. I love doing this podcast because I love to talk to people, but I am process improvement solution oriented. So if I am not making progress, I am feeling like there is a problem. And it just happened. I can't even remember where I found the emotion code. And so I got the book. Somebody maybe said something to me about it, and I was like, I'm going to try this. And it was interesting because I spent about, I think it's 18 months or about 2 years really working through, every couple of days asking. I went and saw some people because there very much are things. I would get to a point where weeks on end, I'd say, are there any trapped emotions? And it would say no. And I'm like, I know there is, but I need some help. I need some external help. So I saw a couple of people. And it was interesting because I've read some stories about people's dramatic transformations after the heart wall is removed. And so Maryann talked a little bit about that. And it's basically just a bunch of really big trapped emotions that create a barrier around your heart. And I didn't feel like when that happened, when the final sort of heart wall emotion was released, I didn't feel like it wasn't like a light switch. I wasn't like, oh my God. But now, 2 years later, I feel like I'm a completely different person. And it's really interesting because I had somebody that I knew from 6 to 8 years ago recently come back into my life. And they actually asked me, what happened to you? You are so different from before. It's crazy. Right. And I was like, I don't know. I've just been doing all this stuff, right?
That's
And
so
so,
wonderful.
yeah. So it's like, I was expecting, based on what I read, to feel this immediate, like, oh, I feel so good. And I had inherited emotions from 28 generations and 10 generations. And, I had all of that too. And it never really felt, I never got that, oh my God, I feel so much better now. But I was having physical reactions. Every time I get an inherited emotion out, my body reacts. I start sweating. I start crying. I'll sneeze. I'll burp. Like some sort of physical reaction will happen every single time I do an inherited emotion. So for me, that's really telling, because I'm like, oh, okay, well, I'm not consciously recognizing a sigh of relief, but my body is actually reacting to the work that I'm doing.
I love it. I love it. I
Yeah.
want to mention one more thing
Do it.
for the process improvement. So I've been an administrator of mental health programs most of my career. And I loved process improvement
Oh my
programs.
gosh.
I loved it. And so efficiency was always in the back of my head. And so
Yes.
psychotherapy, when I was doing psychotherapy, I'm like, oh, this is too slow.
Yeah.
It's too, and the conscious mind is really slow.
Yeah.
So
Well, because it also it goes in irrelevant directions. It makes irrelevant associations. It might not even be able to access the root cause, if you will. Like if it's so buried
mhm,
and so
mhm.
20 generations ago, how long will it take for that conscious brain to be like, oh, that's where it is, way down there 20 generations ago, that doesn't make any sense to me. Well, Maryann, this has been a phenomenal conversation. Thank you so much for joining today. I have one more quick question, which is, if somebody wanted to get in contact with you or reach out to you, what would be the best way for them to do that?
That's great. Easiest is my email, which is Maryann, Maryann, at transformtoawaken.com.
Beautiful. So we will include that in the show notes. I will also get the information about that Anita Majori book. We'll include that. I'll include the burnout book, the emotion code book, and the belief code, if there is a book, and a body code book.
There's not a book for that, but the body
Okay.
code.
Okay, cool. So we'll include the links for all of that in the show notes per the usual. And Maryann, I just wanted to say I was thrilled about this conversation, and I'm super happy and excited about how it went. I feel really pumped and energized, and thank you so much for joining me
Well,
today.
thank you, Rebecca. You have been a delight. It's been wonderful to talk with you and chat through this. So thank you.
And there we have it. Our episode about emotions, one of my favorite things to talk about, something I'm still getting better at personally. A great way to kind of round out the holiday season and the end of the year. And I am going to be releasing a episode next week on Christmas. I know that it is Christmas Day, but one of my goals with this podcast was to be consistent with my releases, and it is Wednesday. So we are going to drop a part 1 of a new part 2 episode. Also, if you've made it this far in the podcast this year and you've made it this far in this particular episode, go ahead and DM me on Instagram at spirituality.what and let me know what topics you would be interested in learning about next year. And that will enter you into a drawing for the new year for some free merch. So really excited about that, excited to share the love. If you go to spiritualitywhat.com, there's a link at the top of the page to check out the merch if you want to check it out before entering. And happy holidays, everybody. We'll catch you next week. Thank you for joining me on today's Spirituality What adventure. Subscribe, rate, review, and share this podcast. Visit us on Instagram at spirituality.what to interact, tell us what spirituality means to you, and even provide some of your own personal musings. Human on, you phenomenal spiritual beings.